Hello, what's up everyone? This is Joshua Caalim of Studio Robotics and you're currently watching a video about Raspberry Pi. Yup, this video is all about Raspberry Pi. Well, what is Raspberry Pi? Well, a Raspberry Pi is a tiny credit card sized computer that can be plugged into a TV monitor or computer. But what does this tiny computer can do? Well, it can actually perform almost everything, just like what the bigger sized computer can do. Take note, almost. Why almost? Because a Raspberry Pi has limited GPIO pins. The latest version has only 40 GPIO pins. I'm talking about GPIO pins. GPIO pins are used to connect the external components of the device or the application or the project that we're going to develop. So that's the purpose of the GPIO pins. So anyway, who started Raspberry Pi? Well, Raspberry Pi was founded by Mr. Eben Upton, a British technical director and a Broadcom architect in application-specific integrated circuit. So yeah, it was built to promote teaching of basic computer science in schools and in developing countries. It is now very popular in college because it is being utilized by students, most of the students, in creating their capstone or thesis projects. So now, let's talk about the versions of the Raspberry Pi. So in the next few seconds, I'm gonna be showing you the clips of versions of the Raspberry Pi. So here we go, guys. So the first is we have the first prototype, 2006. This image is a prototype of a $25 computer put together by the Raspberry Pi's co-creator Mr. Eben Upton in 2006. The board uses an Atmel Atmega 644 microcontroller clocked at 22.1 MHz and 512K static random access memory or SRAM. 19 of the Atmel's 32 general-purpose input-output pin lines are used to drive the SRAM address bus. The board could output a 320 by 240 resolution image to a display. Raspberry Pi prototype revealed by BBC, 2011. This thumb drive prototype was the world's first real glimpse of the Raspberry Pi. Of course, this was very different to the board that would launch in 2012. While it still encompassed some of the final features, including HDMI and USB port, the launch machine would offer more features and be significantly larger. The board's features and size and mooted price had more in common with the Raspberry Pi Zero, which would launch in November 2015. The Alpha Boards 2011. The Raspberry Pi started to take shape in 2011 as the foundation moved to using a low-cost ARM-based system on a chip designed by Broadcom. The BCM2835 would be used in the launch machine and was important in that it allowed the Raspberry Pi to run full Linux-based operating systems. This BCM2835-based Alpha board shared many of the characteristics of the first Raspberry Pi but were also larger and more expensive, with the co-creators spending months whittling down what they described as $110 monster to the affordable machine that launched. The Beta board, produced in the final days of 2011. The Beta boards were the product of months of cost-cutting by Upton and Raspberry Pi co-creator Mr. Pete Lomas. 20 of the boards were built at the Norco Technologies factory in Chisare in the run-up to Christmas, despite giving Raspberry Pi co-creator Pete Lomas a scare when the first board he tried didn't work. After applying a simple manual fix, the boards worked perfectly and the boards were pretty much the same computer that would launch in 2012. Raspberry Pi 1 Model B, 2012. The Raspberry Pi 1 Model B went on sale in February 2012, racking up more than 100,000 orders on the first day. Upton and Lomas managed to pack the $35 with 2 USB ports, 100 Mbps Ethernet, 1.3 HDMI, 26 GPIO pin header with a 700 MHz single-core processor and video core 4 GPU capable of hardware-accelerated 1080 progressive video playback in keeping with the Foundation's educational mission and commitment to transparency. Each board was available with a variety of Linux-based operating systems and a suite of programming tools. Raspberry Pi 1 Model A, February 2013. The lower spec variant of the Raspberry Pi, which sells for a cheaper price but has less memory, only one USB port and no Ethernet. Popular use in embedded projects. It has the specification of Broadcom BCM2835 700 MHz ARM1176 GZFS processor with FPU and video core 4 GPU, 256 MB RAM, boots from SD card, HDMI port, one USB 2.0 port, RCA video port, SD card slot, powered from micro USB port, 3.5mm audio out jack, header footprint for camera connection, and it has the size of 85.6 by 53.98 by 17mm. Raspberry Pi Compute Module, April 2014. The guts of a Raspberry Pi shrank down to fit on a board the size of a memory module, aimed at those who want to create a prototype electronics. The compute board has the same ARM-based Broadcom 2835 chip as the Raspberry Pi 1 and 512 MB of SDRAM together with a 4 GB of embedded multimedia card flash storage. The module is a 200-pin board based on the JEDEC SODIMM form factor. Raspberry Pi 1 Model B+, July 2014. It is a souped-up version of the original Raspberry Pi Model B board, adding more power, more USB ports, more general-purpose input-output pins to expand the board, a tidied-up layout, and better audio. It has the specification of 512 MB RAM, 4 USB ports, Ethernet port, 3.5mm jack for audio and composite video out, HDMI, Broadcom BCM2835, and it also contains an ARM1176 GZFS with floating point running at 700 MHz and a video core for GPU. Also, it is capable of Blu-ray quality playback using H.264 at 40 Mbits. Raspberry Pi 1 Model A+. This item is the Raspberry Pi 1 Model A+, an even smaller version of the Raspberry Pi 1 Model A, which has 512 MB of RAM, an HDMI output, audio output, RCA composite video output through the 3.5mm jack, one USB port, and 0.1 spaced pins that provides access to general purpose input and outputs or GPIO. The Model A Raspberry Pis are smaller and less expensive than the Model B Raspberry Pis. The Raspberry Pi requires a micro SD card with an operating system on it, which is not included. Raspberry Pi 2 Model B, February 2015. The Raspberry Pi 2 boosted the board's specs to a quad-core processor and 1GB of memory, with the new machine racking up several times the benchmark score of its predecessor, as well as being able to run Windows 10 IoT Core and Ubuntu. It has the specification of 900 MHz quad-core Broadcom BCM2836 CPU with 1GB DDR2 RAM, video core 4 3D graphics core, 40-pin extended pins with 27 GPIO pins, micro SD card slot, multiple ports, 4 USB ports, full-sized HDMI, 4-pole stereo output and composite video port, CSI camera port, and DSI display port. It has the size of 85 by 56 by 17mm. Raspberry Pi Zero, November 2015. Despite costing a minuscule $5, the Pi Zero is a little bit more capable than the original Raspberry Pi Model B that launched back in 2012 for $35. The board has the same single-core ARM-based processor as the first generation Model B, but it's slightly faster. The system memory remains the same. It has the specification of BCM2835 system on a chip 1 GHz, 512 MB of RAM, micro SD storage, mini HDMI, 2 micro USB ports, one for power and one for the data. Unpopulated 40-pin GPIO connectors, compatible with existing HAT add-ons, and it has the dimensions of 65mm by 30mm by 5mm. Raspberry Pi 3 Model B, February 2016. The Raspberry Pi 3 introduces supports for a number of technologies for the first time. It's the first Pi to be based on a 64-bit chipset and to include Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity. The newer and faster chipset performs some 50% better than that of the Raspberry Pi 2 and roughly 10 times better than the original single-core Raspberry Pi in a multi-threaded CPU benchmark like Sysbench. It has the specification of Broadcom BCM2837, 1.2 GHz quad-core 64-bit ARM Cortex-A53, 4 USB 2.0 with 480 Mbps data transfer, microSD card or via USB attached storage, 802.11 in wireless LAN or peak transmit or receive throughout of 180 Mbps, Bluetooth 4.1, 1GB LPDDR2 900 SDRAM, 400 MHz video core for multimedia, 40 general purpose input-output pins, full HDMI port, combined 3.5mm audio out jack and composite video, camera interface and display interface. Raspberry Pi 3 Model B+, March 2018. The new Raspberry Pi 3 Model B Plus is the most powerful Raspberry Pi available next to Raspberry Pi 4, leveling up both the raw performance and Wi-Fi speeds. The new board is beefier version of the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B, sharing many of the same specs but overclocking the processor to 1.4 GHz, a 16.7% increase. On top of the faster processor, the new board also boasts improved connectivity, adding support for dual-band 812.11 ABG and Wi-Fi, effectively almost tripling the Wi-Fi throughout of the base Pi 3 and increasing the speed of the board's Ethernet. And last but not the least is the Raspberry Pi 4, which is the latest version of the Raspberry Pi. At first glance, the Raspberry Pi 4 looks very similar to the previous $35 products all the way back to 2014's Raspberry Pi 1B+. They worked hard to keep it this way, but for the first time they made a small number of essential tweaks to the form factor to accommodate new features. For the power, they moved from USB Micro B to USB-C for the power connector. This supports an extra 500 mA of current, ensuring we have a full 1.2A for downstream USB devices even under heavy CPU load. For the video, to accommodate dual display output within the existing board footprint, they replaced the Type A, which is full-size HDMI connector, with a pair of Type D micro HDMI connectors. And for the Ethernet and USB, the Gigabit Ethernet mag jack has moved to the top right of the board from the bottom right, greatly simplifying PCB routing. The 4-pin Power over Ethernet connector remains in the same location, so Raspberry Pi 4 remains compatible with the Power over Ethernet hat. The Ethernet controller on the main SoC is connected to an external Broadcom PHY over dedicated RGMII link, providing full throughput. USB is provided via an external VLI controller connected over a single PCI Express Gen 2 lane and providing a total of gigabit per second of bandwidth shared between the 4 ports. All 3 connectors on the right-hand side of the board overhang the edge by an additional millimeter with the aim of simplifying case design. In all other respects, the connector and mounting hole layout remains the same, ensuring compatibility with existing hats and other accessories. And to sum it up, it has the specification of Broadcom BCM2711 quad-core Cortex A72 at 1 GHz for the CPU. For the GPU, it has a Video Core 6 running 400 MHz. For the RAM, it has 3 options, which is 1 GB, 2 GB, and 4 GB LPDDR4 2400 SDRAM, Gigabit Ethernet dual band 802.11 AC, so you can pick up that 5 GHz network, Bluetooth 5.0, 2 USB 3.0 ports, 2 US 2 ports, Raspberry Pi standard pin GPIO header, USB Type-C for power, and 2 micro HDMI ports. So that's it guys for the versions of the Raspberry Pi. So to add something before I end this video, Raspberry Pi is very useful, especially for home automation. If you want to develop a device for home automation, or you want to develop a device that can actually help the environment or the community. So again, this is Joshua Caalim of Pseudo Robotics. I hope you learned something. That's it guys. Bye.